Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into how Pablo Picasso completely dismantled traditional art. We're going to trace his journey right from his profound emotional depths all the way to his total, absolute reinvention of reality itself. We usually picture Picasso's work as wildly abstract, right? But to really grasp how he shattered reality, we have to look at where he started as a classically trained prodigy. Actually, his mother claimed his literal first words were piz, which is short for lápiz, the Spanish word for pencil. By the time he was just 14, he was painting these academic realist portraits that honestly rivaled the old masters. He knew exactly how to replicate reality perfectly. But replicating reality just wasn't enough for him. He wanted to systematically break down the visual rules of the world. And this timeline perfectly highlights his rapid evolutionary arc. In less than 2 decades, he moved through 4 distinct, revolutionary phases. He wasn't just casually experimenting. It's more like he was devouring styles and discarding them the second he mastered them. He goes from the melancholic blue period into the warmer rose period, pivots really sharply into his African-influenced era, and then finally hits the total geometric fracture of Cubism. Okay, Section 1, the emotional anchor, from tragedy to romance. To truly understand his journey, we first have to contrast his earliest stylistic shifts, because they serve as a literal map of his psyche. On the left, we have the blue period. Sparked by the tragic suicide of his close friend Carlos Casagemas, Picasso practically drains all the warmth right out of his canvas. He paints gaunt mothers, beggars, and themes of blindness almost exclusively in these somber shades of blue and blue-green. It is just a raw visual representation of grief. But contrast that with the right side. By 1904, he meets a bohemian artist named Fernande Olivier, falls in love, and his world literally brightens up. The rose period introduces warmer oranges and pinks, and suddenly his subjects shift to circus performers and harlequins. This massive shift from somber tragedy to warmer, optimistic romance really pushed his willingness to experiment visually. He figured out that color wasn't just about depicting what was physically there, it was a tool to dictate exactly how the viewer was supposed to feel. Moving on to Section 2, the paradigm shift, the shock of primitivism. So imagine the sheer visceral shock factor of what came next. In 1907, Picasso unveils a painting to his close friends called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and it completely horrified the art establishment. I mean, even his friend and rival, Henri Matisse, angrily dismissed the work as a hoax. Why? Because the figures were jagged, their spatial relations were completely distorted, and they stared out with this terrifying mask-like intensity. The reaction was so severe that Picasso didn't even exhibit the piece publicly for another 9 years. That specific painting basically kicked off his African-influenced period. After visiting the Ethnographic Museum at the Palais du Trocadero in Paris, he was profoundly moved by African and Iberian artifacts. He actually went back and repainted the faces of the figures in Les Demoiselles to reflect the sharp, geometric, and highly expressive masks he saw there. This brief but hugely influential period was the definitive moment Picasso decided the old rules of academic perspective simply didn't apply to his canvas anymore. A face didn't have to look like a face, it just had to feel like one. Which brings us to Section 3, the analytical breakdown, the invention of Cubism. All right, let's dive into analytic Cubism. Spanning from roughly 1909 to 1912, notice what happened to the vibrant colors from his blue and rose periods? They are totally gone. Picasso strips away all those emotional colors, restricting his palette strictly to monochrome browns, grays, and neutrals. For him, color had become a distraction. He wanted to strictly analyze and dissect forms, taking everyday objects like guitars, violins, or bottles, and subjecting them to this rigorous visual autopsy. Think of his genius here as a mechanical process in 3 distinct steps. First, you observe a real-world 3D object. Second, instead of drawing it from a single fixed viewpoint like artists had done since the Renaissance, you break it apart into flat geometric planes. And third, you reassemble those fragments on the canvas so the viewer can see the front, the side, and the back of the object all at the exact same time. It completely challenges everything about how we perceive 3-dimensional space on a flat surface. But of course, he doesn't stop there. By 1912, the style evolves again, and synthetic cubism absolutely changes the game. Instead of just painting fragmented planes, Picasso starts pasting cut paper fragments. We're talking actual pieces of wallpaper, bits of newspaper, or printed oilcloth directly onto the canvas. This is widely considered the invention of fine art collage and assemblage. He's literally taking real-world items and completely blurring the line between a traditional painting and physical reality. Let's put these two side by side to really highlight the experimental shift. Analytic cubism is all about breaking reality down into painted monochrome shapes. Synthetic cubism, on the other hand, is about building a new reality up using actual physical pieces of the outside world, bringing color and texture right back into the mix. It's basically the difference between taking an engine apart to see how it works versus using spare parts to build a completely new machine. By 1915, his art had become so intensely geometric and uniquely structured, a phase often referred to later as crystal cubism, that even Picasso himself didn't know what to call it anymore. He wrote a letter to his great patron, the American writer Gertrude Stein, and literally said, "We need a new name to designate them." His relentless experimentation had pushed art into completely uncharted territory that required an entirely new vocabulary. The traditional words for painting or sculpture just didn't cut it anymore. And that leads to our final section, number 4, the legacy of rule-breaking, a lifetime of creation. 45,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the astounding number of unsold works left in his estate when he died in 1973 at the age of 91. And remember, that's just what he hadn't sold. We're talking nearly 2,000 paintings, over 1,200 sculptures, thousands of ceramics, and over 7,000 drawings. He was a machine of endless creation. Because he never stopped evolving, from academic realism to the emotional blue and rose periods, to the shock of his African-influenced haze, and right through the total reinventions of Cubism, he left behind a legacy that forever altered the trajectory of modern art. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think back to the very beginning of his journey. Picasso had to become an absolute master of the traditional rules before he ever decided to break them. You have to know the exact boundaries of the box before you can step outside of it. So consider how this applies to you. What rules are you learning today so that you can completely rewrite them tomorrow? Keep learning, keep experimenting, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.